Just when I thought my beef with the HOA couldn't get any worse, I found out that Karen from the neighborhood had planted landmines on my farm. Living on a farm should be synonymous with peace, fresh air, beautiful sunrises, cows chewing grass leisurely. But of course, that doesn't apply when you have a neighborhood ruled by an HOA, commanded by the human version of discord. That woman. Ever since I set foot on this earth, it's been a cold war. I wanted quiet. She wanted control. Any detail was a problem. A fence a few inches off the standard. A chicken coop visible from the street. The color of the barn that didn't match the aesthetics of the condominium. You know that kind of person who acts like they own the whole neighborhood? Well, my patience was short, and my stubbornness even greater, so I never gave in. This must have affected her so much that one day, out of the blue, the silent war turned into a minefield. Literally. I should have been suspicious when I noticed that she was quieter than usual. In recent months, her discussions about order and decorum had diminished. No more boring pamphlets with ridiculous rules. No more calls to emergency HOA meetings about the importance of uniformity in properties. Her silence should have been my first warning that something worse was coming. However, like any sensible person, I went on with my life without caring too much. I had cattle to feed, a fence to mend, and a stock of beer to keep balanced in the cooler. If that woman decided to stop bothering me, all the better for me. Or so I thought. The problem came to light in a way that I couldn't have imagined even in my worst delusions. It all started with a bang. Not thunder, not a hunting shot. A real bang. The kind that makes the ground vibrate and the birds fly out like a natural disaster movie. I ran out of the barn, my heart already racing, not knowing what to expect. At first, my mind tried to find some logical explanation. A gas explosion? Some idiot testing fireworks? But when I got closer to the source of the noise, I realized that the scenario was much, much worse. One of my cows, poor Molly, had been blown up. I swear, I never thought I'd see an ox fly like that in my life. The impact left a crater in the pasture, with a strange smell of burning in the air. And right there, in the middle of the destruction, pieces of overturned earth gave away the truth. This was no accident. It was a landmine. The shock was immediate, but as soon as it hit me, the only thing that came back was anger. The kind of anger that makes your blood boil and your brain think of things that could land you in jail. Because you see, I've never had enemies who would blow me up, so it had to be her. Who else would have this crazy obsession with me just because I refused to let my property become an HOA postcard? Still unable to believe my eyes, I did the only logical thing. I called the police. Because, let's face it, as much as I loved the idea of taking matters into my own hands, I couldn't ignore the fact that someone had basically tried to murder me with war-worthy methods. And that's when the whole thing got even more bizarre. The police arrived quickly, and when I explained the situation, they were just as perplexed as I was. Landmines? Here? The sheriff repeated as if I were joking, but it wasn't until he took a few steps into the destroyed area and heard the sound of a click under his boot that everyone understood it was no joke. The scene was worthy of a bad movie. A bunch of frozen policemen staring at the ground as if it was going to explode at any second. While I tried not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, the town sheriff, stuck in my pasture because someone thought this was Vietnam. And that's how the FBI ended up involved. Because, apparently, blowing up cattle with landmines is not something that goes unnoticed by the federal authorities. If you'd told me that one day I'd be standing in my own pasture, surrounded by FBI agents, while an expert from the bomb squad poked at the ground to prevent any more bovine explosions, I'd have told the person to drink less coffee. But there I was, trying not to lose what little sanity I had left, while a bunch of suits tried to figure out how the hell a farm turned into a minefield. The first thing that became clear was that this woman had gone up several notches on the insanity scale. Because, you see, I was used to HOAs sending letters about high bushes, ugly fences, and other absurdities, but who in their right mind thinks, this farm ruins my aesthetic? I guess I'll solve it with explosives. Of course, for an FBI agent, this raised some basic questions. How did she get landmines? Where did she buy them? Who helped her? And the most important question, what else has this crazy woman been up to? While the bomb squad team was finishing checking that I could take 2 more steps without turning into Bran, one of the agents came over to talk to me. The guy was the embodiment of the stereotypical federal agent. Black suit, sunglasses, face like he hadn't slept since 2007. "Do you have any enemies?" he asked, seriously. If it hadn't been for the context, I would have laughed. Enemy? I had cows. Not an international trafficking network. "Only if you count that woman from the HOA, I replied, pointing to her house. The agent didn't blink. "Do you think she'd be capable of something like that?" "Oh, my friend, do I? If that woman has almost fined a dog for barking too loudly, can you imagine if she couldn't blow up a farmer? Look, she's already freaked out about the color of my barn, but landmines are a whole new level even for her." The agents exchanged quick glances, as if my answer had confirmed some suspicion. And that's when it got even more interesting. They were already investigating her. Not for landmines, because that was news even to them, but for fraud, embezzlement, and possible links to smuggling. As it turned out, that HOA was more than just a bunch of annoying old people deciding the color of fences. They had power, influence, and money passing around without anyone knowing exactly how. And do you know what the last straw was for the feds? The mines. Because it's one thing to dip into the HOA's cash to pay for fancy dinners. It's quite another to turn a farm into a war episode. So, while they got everything ready to search the house of the most daring suburban criminal in history, I stood there, crossing my arms and enjoying the breeze, because the only thing left for me to do was to watch the circus burn. And it did. The agents entered her house with a warrant in hand, and in less than half an hour, they left with boxes and boxes of documents, electronics, and what looked like bundles of cash. You know that classic movie scene when the bad guy gets caught and starts screaming that it's all a mistake? That's exactly what it is. "This is an abuse of authority. I'm a model citizen," she shouted, as 2 officers escorted her out. I, of course, seized the moment to take a good look and let out a nice one. "Oh, so planting landmines on other people's property is part of the citizenship handbook now?" She turned to me, red with hatred, her eyes blazing, as if she wanted to blow me away with the force of her thought. "You don't understand anything. You've ruined everything," the officer next to her snorted. "Ma'am, you planted illegal explosives on someone's land." The silence that followed was the best thing about my day. The HOA, which had previously reigned with an iron fist over every detail of the neighborhood, now watched from afar as their great leader was thrown into an FBI car. Some neighbors, those who lived under the terror of her absurd rules, even came out to applaud. But the best came later, when the agents started talking about how she got the mines. Not only had she embezzled money from the HOA, but she had suspicious contacts who sold military equipment. The kind of thing an ordinary civilian shouldn't be able to get, unless they were involved in something very unusual. In the end, it wasn't just a boring HOA, it was practically a condo cartel. The officers made sure she got a good sentence, especially since you couldn't ignore the fact that her intention was, at the very least, to try to blow me out of there. The HOA was left without a president, without morale, and, soon after, without half of its members, because many people decided to leave before any more investigations began. As for me, well, I was still processing everything. I just wanted to raise my cattle, live my life quietly, without having to worry about whether stepping on my own pasture was going to be my last action on earth. But at least now, the real danger was gone. The only thing left was a question. Was this HOA hiding more secrets than we had imagined? With the crazy HOA duly handcuffed and the FBI team digging deep into her past, Any sensible person would have thought the mess was over. I, however, already knew that luck had never been my strong suit. Because, you see, when a simple problem with living together escalates into a landmine attack, you begin to realize that life has decided to throw you into a bad movie script. In the days following her arrest, my farm became a meeting place for all sorts of federal and city law enforcement officials. While the FBI searched the woman's house for evidence, the experts from the bomb squad were still making sure that my own pasture wasn't a roulette wheel. And guess what? They found more mines. Yes, more. It wasn't just a single artifact that blew up poor Molly. There were at least 5 other mines buried around the farm, which begs the question, what was her plan? Was it supposed to be a gradual explosion strategy? I'm going to detonate this farmer little by little until he gives up. The agents began to theorize that she wasn't alone in this. An HOA can be an insufferable, overbearing bunch, but buying landmines and planting them on a neighbor's property is another level. That required contacts, resources, and, above all, a completely rotten mind. And that's when her story got even more bizarre. As the feds delved deeper into her life, sordid details began to emerge. First came the discovery that this woman hadn't had a steady job in years. Despite this, she lived in a large house, drove an expensive car, and flaunted a lifestyle that was definitely not compatible with the income of a volunteer HOA president. So they began to investigate the HOA's finances. And, oh, what a surprise, fraud everywhere. The agents discovered that she had embezzled thousands of dollars over the years. Part of this money came from resident fees, collected under ridiculous pretexts such as neighborhood maintenance and aesthetic improvement. But do you know where this money was going? Financing a small private army. Admittedly, private army may be an exaggeration, but you know those suspicious contacts I mentioned earlier? The FBI found records of purchases of illegal military equipment, high-caliber weapons, and, of course, explosives. This turned a simple investigation into an annoying HOA into something much bigger, because now it wasn't just a hysterical woman who went berserk over a farm that didn't fit in with the rest of the neighborhood. She was a criminal with ties to arms trafficking and possibly other illegal activities. And do you know what made her situation worse? She ran away. Yes, the woman who was arrested in front of everyone managed to escape from custody before being officially transferred to a federal detention center. At this point, I didn't know if I was living in an action movie or an absurd comedy. Now, in addition to being charged with attempted murder with illegal explosives, the woman was also wanted nationally. If before I had been calm because she had been arrested, now I was wondering if she was going to try to come back to finish the job. While the police and FBI were turning over every stone trying to find her, the HOA collapsed spectacularly. Without their leader, the other members began to realize that no one wanted to follow the same line of rule with an iron fist and underground bombs. Many started jumping ship before the investigations got to them. The icing on the cake was when agents found forged documents inside her house. They were altered title deeds, which suggested that she had plans to try to take possession of land that wasn't hers. And guess which one was on the list? Mine. Yes, as well as wanting to blow me up, she was planning to forge documents to try to take over my farm legally. The neighbors, who had previously been afraid to go against her, began to revolt. They discovered that, in addition to the embezzled money, she was also overcharging for services in order to make even more profit. This included charging for supposed community improvements that never happened, creating absurd fees for ridiculous things, such as public lighting fees, even though they are the responsibility of the city council, randomly fining residents for violations and pocketing the money. In other words, the HOA was never about maintaining the aesthetics of the neighborhood. It was a money-making machine for the woman who was now on the run and armed. The question now was, where was she? The FBI searched everything. Security cameras, suspicious contacts, traced calls. Nothing. The woman had evaporated. And honestly, that worried me. If before I couldn't trust that my pasture wasn't going to explode, now I also had to worry that a control freak was going to show up in the middle of the night to settle the score. I slept very little. I kept my guns loaded, and I always kept an eye out for any strange cars driving slowly down my road. The HOA was officially dead. The FBI was all over me, asking for any information about her possible location. Well, I just wanted to know how long I was going to have to live in fear of that bastard coming back to finish what she started. But what I didn't know yet was that she was already closer than I thought. What I wanted most of all was to forget all this madness and go back to my peaceful life. But how could I forget when the HOA in my neighborhood had become an FBI case? My farm had almost become a battlefield, and now I had an escaped lunatic who could very well be planning my funeral. I tried to follow the routine, but every strange noise put me on alert. I knew she was loose, and I knew that if that woman went from, "I'm going to fine you for not cutting the grass," to, "I'm going to plant landmines on your land," then she was capable of anything. The nights were the worst. I slept very little and woke up in a cold sweat, with every rustle of leaves or crack of wood. It didn't help that sometimes I was sure that a strange car was passing my property, always too slowly, as if it was watching me. Then, one day, it happened. I was already suspecting that my luck had an expiration date, and when I heard the sound of an engine shutting down near my barn in the middle of the night, I knew the time had come. The silence that followed was even worse, because when someone invades your property and makes a noise, they usually want to scare you or let you know they're there. But when someone arrives and is completely silent, it's because they're trying to catch you off guard. I picked up my rifle and stood up slowly. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked through the hallway of the house in silence, feeling my heart beat so loudly that it seemed as if the whole ranch could hear it. The living room window gave me a partial view of the barn, and there she was, or at least I was sure it was her. I couldn't see her face, but her posture gave her away. That way of walking, that controlled rush as if she were in her own house. She was wearing dark clothes and holding something in her hand. A piece of metal glinted in the dim moonlight. I could only think she came back to finish the job. I could have shot her right there, but I wanted to know what she was doing. She wasn't the kind of person who broke into houses to steal TVs. So why the barn? I kept watching. She stooped down by one of the wooden posts and began to fiddle with the floor. My blood ran cold. She was planting another mine. That was it. She'd managed to escape and, instead of disappearing off the map, she'd come back here to chop me up. If there had been any doubt that this woman had no moral restraints left, there was none now. It wasn't just an attempt to intimidate me. She wanted to get me out of the way for good. I didn't think twice about it. I picked up my phone and dialed the FBI. I already had the contact details of one of the agents investigating the case. They answered on the second ring. "She's here." My voice came out lower than I expected. On the other end of the line, the agent took a second to answer. "Are you sure?" "She's on my property. She's planting more mines." From then on, it was a blur. I knew I couldn't wait, so I did the only thing that seemed logical. I fired a shot into the air. The noise echoed around the farm, and the woman froze. She turned quickly towards me, and even in the darkness, I could feel the expression of pure hatred on her face. "Get off my ranch now!" I shouted, holding the rifle tightly. She hesitated. Her brain must have been processing whether it was worth facing an armed rancher or whether it was better to run. She chose to run. She took off running across the field, but I had already alerted the agents. In less than 5 minutes, red and blue lights cut through the night. Sirens blared in the silence, and my farm became the stage for the final scene of a chase. The feds surrounded everything. Helicopter, sniffer dogs, searchlights. I didn't even know they were so thirsty to catch her, but apparently her escape from prison had already put her on the national wanted list. She tried to run. She was caught almost at the back fence of my property, trying to escape the same way she came in. This time, there was no escape. She was knocked to the ground by 3 officers and handcuffed tightly. Even so, she was still screaming like crazy. "You don't understand anything. I was protecting this place. I was saving the community." The officers ignored her. They threw her into a car, and for the second time, she was taken away in a police car. Only this time, I knew I wasn't going to get away so easily. The next day, the news came. She had more crimes behind her back than I could count. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement of HOA money, possession of illegal explosives, attempted murder, and now trespassing and domestic terrorism. Yes, the federal government considered the mines to be terrorism. The penalty? Decades in prison. This time, no bail, no escape, no HOA for her to play emperor. The neighborhood changed completely after that. The HOA was disbanded, and no one wanted a committee running their lives anymore. The crazy woman's house was sold, and the previously frightened residents began to breathe a sigh of relief. And what about me? Well, I finally had my peace back. My farm is back to being just a piece of land with cows chewing grass, no landmines, no police on my doorstep, no sociopath trying to blow me up. But whenever someone mentions HOA around me, all I can think is, never again, never again. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.